having custom AI assistants that are trained to answer specific questions about any table in your Glide app. Now imagine you could also upload additional files like PDFs, Word docs, and text files to enrich your assistant's knowledge base. Well, you don't have to imagine that because that's exactly what we're going to be building today. In this tutorial, you'll discover how to seamlessly create and manage custom OpenAI assistants. These assistants will treat your Glide tables and the files you upload as their sole source of truth when answering your questions. Even better, all of this, from the creation and handling of assistants, vectors, files, threads, and messages and responses, everything will be handled entirely from a single page in your Glide app. This is a complex and intricate tutorial, but it's incredibly powerful. So if you want to build along, you'll need a Glide account with access to the Call API feature and a free make.com account for one specific scenario. Every code snippet, instruction, and URL I use in this tutorial will be available on Loqode School. As of June 4th, we have over 1,100 students in Loqode School, all of whom get exclusive access to our short and advanced tutorials, our live Q&A sessions, and our app building sessions that happen every single week. So if you want to join Loqode School, click below to apply now. For now, grab your coffee, open a blank Glide app, and get ready to unlock the full potential of Glide and OpenAI to create custom AI assistants like a pro. Let's dive in. So what I want to do now quickly before we actually get into the build is give you an overview of how this all works, because it's going to bring you a lot of clarity when we're building and you're putting the pieces together to understand what we're actually doing to set up these custom AI assistants. So it's a little bit different from the standard OpenAI integration where we just get the API key, we paste it into Glide in the integrations tab, and then we can use OpenAI in whatever, columns or actions, that sort of stuff. This is different. It's because OpenAI actually handles assistants a little bit differently than the standard chat. So what we have to do to set this up is first we need to create a database. And this is going to be the database that's going to house the files that we are telling the assistant to use as its source of truth. Okay? These are the files that we want it to actually answer questions about. So we're going to create the database. Then what we're going to do is create an assistant and give that assistant access to that database. We're going to say, hey, I'm creating an assistant and I want you to use this database as your source of truth. Now, once we've done that, we need to put a few files into that database so we can update the assistant on what we actually want it to answer questions about. So we create the database, we create the assistant, and then we put some files into that database. What we need to do next is create a chat. So this is just an empty chat. It's a bucket that's waiting for messages to be put in it. So we put a message in it, and this is our question. This is probably a question about the files or the data that we've actually uploaded to the database. Then we need to ask a specific assistant to respond to the messages in that chat. And once we've done that, then we get an update of all of the messages in the chat. So here's what that would look like visually if we have a look. We create a database, okay? And in OpenAI, they call this a vector. So if you get a bit confused with the language, just imagine a vector is just a database. So once we've done that, then what we need to do is create an assistant, okay? So we create assistant, and this assistant now has access to the database that we just created. Now, once we've done those two steps, then what we need to do is add some files. So we add a whole bunch of files, and what we'll do is this can be, PDF files, it can be code, it can be JSON, it can be any of those particular formats that OpenAI accepts. Now, what we'll do is when we're actually building the Glide app, we're going to validate that it's a file type that OpenAI accepts and can index and search. And if it's not, we'll reject it. So you don't have to worry about that. So these are the files. Now, this is kind of separate, right? We've done this. We've created the assistant. We've created the database. We've added some files to that database, and it's just kind of ready. It's got that source of truth, and it's ready to answer some questions. So what we need to do next is create a chat. Okay, and in OpenAI, they call this a thread. So we create a chat. It's an empty bucket. It's waiting for messages. So what do? We send some messages. All right, so this is our message. Hey, can you please answer some questions about these files? Once we've done that, the assistant, we have to specify which assistant we want to respond to this message. Because we could have, another assistant here, another assistant here. It doesn't, the chat, the thread is separate from the assistant. We have to say, hey, this assistant we just created, can you please respond to this message? So we create the chat, we send a message, and we ask a specific assistant to respond. And then once we've done that, we just need to get the replies. So let's do a quick overview again. We create a database, which is called a vector. We create an assistant, and we give them access to that database. Then we start putting some files in there. And now this guy is ready to answer some questions. So what we do next is we create a chat or a thread. We send a message to that thread, probably asking about these files. And then we ask a specific assistant to respond. We give it a bit of time to respond, maybe 5 to 7 seconds, something like that. And then once it's responded, we get the chat and we send this chat into Glide, and we kind of figure out what the latest message is. So that's the complete overview. Hopefully that gives you some clarity as we're building it out, because there's a few moving parts and it's just good to get an overall blueprint of what we're building. So let's jump into the build. All right, so the first thing you're going to do is, if you have a Glide account, you'll be on the dashboard. If you don't have a Glide account, you got to sign up. Just be aware that you do need access to the Call API feature to use it to basically talk to OpenAI. So with that being said, what you want to do is start a new app. In my case, I've just created a new app already. And we're going to clear it out of all the tables and the various components and pages that we don't need. So what you want to do is just remove everything from the layout screen. So remove the pages, remove the components, and then in the data, just remove everything besides the users table. The users table is the only one we need right now because we're going to be adding them as we go. So let's add the first table. And we're going to start with the data that we want to send to the assistant to use as its source of truth. We'll deal with the files later. At the moment, we're going to create a table. And in this case, we're going to call it wine emoji wines. And this is the table that we're going to be syncing with the assistant. So it has access to all the data in this table. Now, if you want to sync the assistant with many different tables, what you can do is create a sync table, or you can call it whatever you want. But basically, you can pull all the information into that one table and use that to sync. It just makes it a little bit easier. You can sync separately, but we're not going to do that in this one. So the first thing we're going to do is add a row ID. And I'm going to delete this default name column because that has a different name in the API. Anyone that's part of Loqode School knows always delete the default name column. So here we're going to put wine/name. And then we're going to duplicate this, another text column. And we're going to say wine/aromas. And then we're going to duplicate this. And we're just going to say wine/stock. Now you can use your own information, but for the tutorial, maybe just keep it the same. So we've got this, we're just setting a number column. We don't need fractional units. And we're going to add 3 basic rows. And I'm just going to copy this information and paste it here. So we've got the name of the wine, some aromas for that wine, and then a stock level for that wine. Now what we want to do is consolidate this into one object. So we're going to call this JSON/object, and we're going to go integrations JSON object. And we're going to add 3 values, and we're going to change this last one to stock. So we've got the name, the aromas, and the stock level. And you can see here that now we have all the information from this particular item stored in one JSON object. And then what we'll do later is we'll combine all of these objects into one array and turn that array into a JSON file and upload it to the assistant. But for now, that is the wine table done. So let's add the next table. We're going to add a blank table. And what we're going to do is add this little arrow, this little chat emoji, and we're going to call this messages. So this is where all the messages are going to be stored. And we're going to drag this above, because what we're kind of doing is we're going to make our way up towards the user table and add everything that we need. So in the user table, we can kind of pull it together and make it work. But for now, all you need to do is add the row ID. Of course, we're going to delete this default name column. And then I'm going to add something called index/all. And this is going to look up all of the row IDs in this table. Okay. Next to this, we're going to say index current, and we're going to figure out using find element index where in this array of IDs the current ID sits. All right, so we're going to set this as the row ID. So we're searching through the values here, and we're going to find out where this row ID sits in terms of order, and then we're going to save that. The next thing we're going to do is add just a text column. This is going to be assistant/ID, because each message needs to be associated with a particular assistant. So we add that, pretty straightforward. Then we're going to add a thread ID, so we can call thread/ID. So each message will be basically addressed or specific to an assistant, and it will also be specific to a thread, which is a chat. So we've got the assistant ID, we've got the thread ID. Then what we're going to do is add something called the message question. And this is where we're going to store the, I cancelled. This is where we're going to store the question that we're asking. So message/question, and we save that. And then what we want to do is duplicate this, and we're going to say message timestamp. And this is going to be basically when the message was sent or received. And we'll set that as long, and we save it. So we've got the ID of the assistant, the ID of the thread that this message belongs to, the question that we've asked, and the timestamp. So let me just move along so I can see what we need to add. Then we're going to add the author ID. So this is the ID of the user who submitted the message. If it was submitted by the bot, this will be blank. By the assistant, it'll be blank. So what we want to do is, because now we got the author ID, we're going to pull in the related author. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a relation, and we're going to say, okay, find any user where the author ID matches the user's row ID. Okay, so if I go to the user table and I copy my row ID and I paste it here, I'm the one that sent the message. You can see that. And so what we want to do now is look up a bit of information from that record. So we're going to say author name. So what's the name of the person who sent this message? So we're going to look up the author's name. And we're going to do this for the photo and the email. So we're going to say photo. So we're going to look up, instead of the name, we're going to look up their photo. And and we're going to duplicate this and we're going to look up their email. So we're just gathering some information about the author of this question, basically. Then what we want to do is we want to create a new column, and this is going to be API/body send message. So this is the body that we're going to include in the API call to actually send a message to a thread. So this is going to be a template column, and I'm just going to copy this code and paste it here. So the role, each message has to have a role. It's either user or assistant, I think. In this case, it's always going to be user, and the content is going to be the message, and the message is the question, right? So this is what we're going to send, and if I add a question, it's not really a question, but if you have a look here, you'll see that the content of my message to the chat is hello. All right. Then what we want to do is add a column to the right, and this is going to be API/body, and this is where we're going to paste the response when we get all the messages. So this is going to be, what did I call it? Response, I think. So this is going to be the body response, and this is just a text field. Okay, so we've added that. Then what we're going to do is I'm just going to copy some code. Because this is going to be a list of all the messages in the chat, what we want to do is just find the latest. So here we're going to say API response latest. Okay, so what we're going to do is, because the response will be JSON, we're going to go integrations, JSON, query JSON, and we're going to get the latest message. So this is the message that is in position 0, which will be the most recent message. And we're going to get it, sorry, this is going to be here. This is going to be the response. So when all those messages come in as a JSON response, we're going to find the latest one. Then what we're going to do is we're going to add a code column, and I'll just copy the JavaScript. And we're going to come back to this message group, and we're going to add a column here. This is going to be message/response. Okay, so what we're going to do is this latest response is going to have a couple of funny characters on the end, and you'll see it when we're asking. And we just want to remove them, basically. So we're going to go to code, or you can just search it actually, JavaScript, and we're going to say, okay, P1 is going to be the response, the latest response. I just want you to clean up. Basically, anything after this, get rid of it, because it'll send the message and then a bunch of funny characters. We don't want them. So this is going to be a nice clean response from the assistant. So we've done that, and we've just got to add a few more columns. Cancel. What did I do? Okay. This is going to be the icon that we want to display. So icon/display. And here I'm using a special plugin that I created that allows me to use really cool icons. So I'm just going to find the link, and I'm going to use here OpenAI logo, and that should be a dash in here. So I'm going to do duotone. I'm going to do 88888, and this is going to be EF. So this is just basically the color of the icon is going to be a dark gray, and then the background of the icon is going to be a light gray. Nothing special here. So we're going to save that, and that'll give us a URL for that. And then what we want to do is, depending on who this message belongs to, either the assistant or the person who asked the question, we want to display certain things. So here I'm going to go say display slash, let's start with the image. And actually we'll start with the message, right? So we'll start, so if then else. So if the message question is empty, it means that we didn't ask it, so it must be a response from the bot, or the assistant, sorry. So we're going to say assistant. Otherwise, it's from us, so we're going to display the author. No, we're going to display the message. Okay. So at the moment, you can see that this is empty. So it's saying, well, this must be from the assistant. But if I say hello, it shows the message. So I need to actually change that to be the response. Right? So it'll show the response. Okay. I made a little error there. But basically we're going to say, okay, if a message from us exists, show our message. If a response from the assistant exists, show that. And that's what's going to appear in our chat thread. So then we can just duplicate this and we can say, all right, well, what about the name? So we're going to say, how did I configure this before? We got the name here. Well, basically, if the author name is not empty, then show the author name. And if it is empty, then we're going to show the name as the assistant. Okay, so this is in the display, in the chat thread, it's going to show basically who, I need to rename this to message. So it's going to show the name of the person who submitted the message. If I get rid of this, it's from the assistant. If I'm the one that sent it, it's from me. Okay. Now we add a column to the right, display email. Now we need to actually specify who this is from. So here we're going to say if then else. So if author email is empty, then we can just create an email for the bot. We can just say assistant@loqode.com. And if it's not empty, then it's obviously from us. So we'll show our email. And we've got one more thing, add a column to the right, and this is the image. So we're going to display image, and this is going to be if then else. So if the author image is empty, we're going to show that icon we just created. Otherwise, we're going to show the author's image. Okay, so we've got 21 columns here. This is the messages table done. It's ready to basically receive the messages and process it. The next table we're going to move on to is the threads table. So I'll see you there. All right, so let's add a new table, blank table, and we're going to call this one little arrow threads. Now threads, as you recall, are just the chats, and they will contain all the messages. So the messages will be assigned to a thread, and that was the thread ID that we just did. So let's get started. Let's do the usual row ID, delete this, and we're going to come in and we're going to say assistant/ID. So this is the assistant that is assigned or answering questions in this thread. Okay, so it's just going to be a text column. Then what we're going to do is add a thread/created column. And this is going to be basically a timestamp, so a date and time column, you can use long, of when the thread was created. Then what we need to do is add something called API/response. So when we create the thread, it's going to send a response. When we get that response, it will contain the thread ID, and that's the next column we're going to add. So we've got the response from the API when we create the thread, and we'll jump back to the thread, and we add a column to the right, and this is going to be thread/ID. And what we're going to do here is, I think it's just a very straightforward, So we're going to add this as a JSON query. We're going to query that response that we get, and we're just going to extract the ID. all right? So we can pull this here. So we've got the assistant ID, which is manually set. And then this is going to be set based on the response that we get, and it's going to extract the ID and put it here. So once we've done that, we've got a few other things to create. And now that we've created the thread ID, we can create a delete endpoint if we ever want to delete this thread. So this is going to be API/endpoint delete thread. So if we don't want the thread anymore, or we're using too many rows and we delete the thread, it'll delete it from both here and OpenAI. So you got nice and clean. So everything's nice and clean, I guess. So what we're going to do is add a template column, and I'll just copy the template column. And basically, we're going to create a URL that includes the thread ID that we just extracted. And that's all we need to do. So whenever we actually have an ID here, this will be the URL that we use to actually delete it eventually if we want to. So now what we're going to do is come back and create a relation. Now that we have the thread ID, we're going to add a column here, and this is going to be messages related. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a relation where the thread ID that we just extracted from the response that we got when we created it matches the messages thread ID, okay? And there's going to be multiple, so we want it to match multiple. And then we're going to save that. And because now it's blank, it's saying, hey, I found a match. But that'll disappear as we continue building. So what we want to do is we're going to create, I believe the next thing we do is create some icons. So we've got some chat dots. Yeah, that's all we got to do. So this is chat dots, and then we've got some colors here. So I'm just going to copy these colors. So what we're going to do, add a column here. This is going to be icon/default. And this is the icon that's going to be displayed for any chats that we're not currently looking at. And again, we're going to use my special icon, but you can use hero icons. And I've done tutorials on that before. So if you don't know how to use hero icons, you can look it up. But what we're going to do here is just search for icons. And this is going to be chat dots. And we're going to make it duotone, which looks nicer in my opinion. And since this is the default, we're just going to use that gray coloring. So EF. And we save that. And then we're going to add a column to the right. And this is going to be icon/current, I think. Yeah. Icon current. And this is, if we click on a chat and we're looking at that chat, it's going to change that icon to green, basically, so we know that it's the current one. So what we're going to do is go code, experimental code, and this is going to be the same icon. It's going to be chat dots, duo tone, but we're going to make this one green. So we'll just paste these values, and if you can't paste them in time, you can just pause the video. So we've got a gray icon if it's not the current thread we're looking at. We've got a green one if it is. Then what we're going to do is we're going to create an if then else. Add a column to the right. This is going to be icon/display. It's the one we want to display for each item. And it's going to be an if then else. At the moment, what we're going to do, because we haven't created it yet, we're just going to say if there are IDs 1, 2, 3, display the default, else display the current. All right, because the information we actually need is going to be in the user table, but we haven't created that current field yet. So we're just going to do a placeholder here, and we just got to remember to come back and set that. So we've got the icon current, which is the display. And then I think we have one more thing to do. No, that's it. 10 columns, 10 columns. So that's it for the threads table. Pretty straightforward. It'll start to make sense as we continue to build out all the other ones, but that's done. Let's move on to the files table. Alrighty, so let's add the files table. So we're going to add a blank table, and we're going to do our funny little arrow, and this is going to be, let's use the folder, and this is going to be files. Now we're going to add it again, we're going to add it above because we're working our way up towards the user table. As usual, we put the little row ID. Excuse me. So we add the row ID and we get rid of this default name column. And here we're going to add an assistant ID. All right, so this is going to be assistant/ID. This is going to be basically a text field. Then what we want to do is add a vector ID. So what database, you remember vector is basically just a database. What database does this file belong to? That's just going to be a text column. And then we want the actual ID of the file, because if we ever want to delete it, we need to know the ID. So we add the file ID, and then we can duplicate this and we can say file/name. So this is the name, and this is something that you can use. It's just for internal reference, so you know what file it is and what files the AI has access to. And we duplicate this, and we're going to change this to the link. So this is the actual link of the file, and you can leave it as a text column or a link column, it doesn't matter. What we want to do next is I'm just going to copy a little bit of JavaScript code, and we're going to duplicate this, and we're going to say file extension. What type of file is it? Is it .pdf? Is it .png? It has to be a file that OpenAI can work with. And this is what we're going to use to validate that. So we're going to search for Java, not Jana, not Java, JavaScript. And we're going to paste it. Okay, so what we're basically doing here is we're going to say, okay, we just uploaded a file into the link column. What's the extension of that file, right? And if it's blank, it's going to say invalid. Or if it's not valid, it'll say invalid. So here, let's just do example.png. It doesn't accept PNG files, but it does accept PDF. So this is going to kind of validate what, when we're uploading, it's going to make sure that when we try and add this file to OpenAI, that it actually can be added. Okay. So we've done that, and then what we want to do, let me just scroll across so I can see which columns we need to add. What we want to do is add a file/created, and this is going to be a date and time column, right? And just can say, okay, when was the file created? Then what we're going to do is create some icons. All right, and this is very important actually for user interface best practices, right? Is having dynamic icons that change colors and stuff like that based on the validity of certain things. So what we're going to do here is the first one is file cloud. I'm just having a look here at what they are, and file X. So I'm going to copy this. So we're going to go here and we say icon/valid. So if it's valid, we want to say, yep, that's all good. And we're going to go computed experimental code. And again, we're going to use my little icons plugin. And this is going to be file cloud. We're going to make it duotone. we're going to just make it gray because we don't want it to be a special color if it's good, because it kind of distracts from maybe a button we want to highlight. And this again is just going to be EF repeated. So we save that. That's if it's valid. And we're going to duplicate this. And this is what's going to show if it's invalid. And it's going to be file X. And we're just going to change this to a red color. Okay. So it's going to be red with a light red background. So that's if it's invalid. Then, of course, what we want to do is add an if then else. And all we need to do is add icon / display. So also, when you're building these apps, make sure you're using the same naming convention so you kind of know what everything is. If you're naming them different things like icon / current or whatever, you won't understand. Display, I know, is always the icon that I want to set in the image field on the front end, because that's going to dynamically switch between the two icons. So we add an if then else, and we're going to say if the file extension is invalid file type, and you remember that's what gets returned if it's invalid, then we're going to show the invalid icon. Otherwise, we're going to say it's all good. So we save that and we move on to the next column, which is the endpoint for deleting the file. So I'm going to copy this and I'm going to say API / endpoint, and this is going to be delete the file. So this is what we put as the endpoint in our API call if we want to delete the file. And we're going to copy this here, and we're going to replace this with the file ID. So we've got 12 columns, and we just need to add one more column, and that is the status column. So besides the created, we're going to say file / status. And what we're going to do is we're going to add an if then else, and we're going to say if the file created is empty. So if we haven't received a response yet to letting us know that the file has been created and added to OpenAI, we're going to say something like uploading to assistant ... So if it's empty, means it's not created yet, so we're just going to show them that it's uploading. And then when we get the response, we're going to show, I think we're just going to show the created, right? And that will just show us the time at which it was created. So that's all we need to do for the files table. Let's move on to the assistants table. Alrighty, so let's add a new blank table. And this one is going to have a little mage dude or dudette, and we're going to call this assistants. And this is going to be basically what all of these kind of things are related to. So this is just a visual representation of the databases, basically the tables that we have in Glide. This is just what I do personally to help me visually see how everything's related. And you'd be surprised how much clarity something like this can bring. So let's get into it. You know the drill. We're going to add the row ID, okay? And then we're going to delete this. And we are going to add assistant / ID. Name. The ID will be dynamic. This is going to be the assistant name. So this is what you call the assistant, basically. You can call it whatever you want. We duplicate this, but along with the name, we need to give some instructions. Okay, so this is like, only use my files as your source of truth. Don't hallucinate and do some weird stuff. And then we're going to duplicate this, and we're going to say temperature. Now these are basically the parameters that we're going to use to set up the assistant. You can add more, there's actually a lot more, and I suggest you refer to the OpenAI API documentation under assistants to see what kind of parameters you can set. But this is just going to be a number, and it's going to be probably just 1 decimal point, and we don't need a group separator. Okay, so we've got the name, the instructions, and the temperature. Then what we're going to do is come across and add something called API/response, and this is going to be the response when we create a vector. So when we create a database, we're going to get a response. This is where we want to store that response. Then we're going to duplicate this, and when we create the assistant, we're also going to get a response. And this is where we want to store that response that we get from the API. So once we've done that, we need to kind of jump back, because now that we've got this response, we need to extract the assistant ID. And we're going to use the query JSON. The JSON we're going to query is the assistant, the API, the response we get from the creating the assistant. And we're just going to search for ID. Now let me just check if that's correct. Yep, it's just going to be ID. So we're going to save that, and we're going to duplicate this, and this is going to be the vector ID. And we're going to do the same thing, but this time we're going to query the response we get after we create a vector. So then what we need to do is we can add a column to the right here, and this is going to be another API column, and this is going to be the body that we use when we actually create the vector. Okay, so we've already created the response, but we need to actually send the body of the API call, and we're going to actually, I believe we're just going to use create JSON object. We're going to use JSON template. In fact, we can use object, JSON object, and it's going to be the name, and that's going to be the name of the assistant, I believe, because we just want to call the database the same name as the assistant, right? So we're going to say the name of this database we're creating is the name of the assistant, so we can actually very easily match databases to assistants. So we save that, and you can see here, if I call the assistant Marco, the database will be called Marco. So now that we've done that, we need to do the same for the assistant. Now this is a little bit more complex. So we're going to duplicate this, and this is going to be the body for creating the assistant. Okay, now instead of JSON object, we actually need to use JSON template, because we have some sub arrays or sub objects within this. So we're going to paste this code, and I'll put this code either in school or below the video, and you can just copy and paste it. But then what we need to do is we need to update this with 4 separate values. So the first one is going to be the instructions. The second one is going to be the name of the assistant. The third one is going to be the vector, and this is going to be the ID of the vector. And then the last one is going to be the temperature. Okay, so we're going to replace these values. You can see here, we're going to replace them with some text. So we're going to say instructions, name, vector ID. this is how we're saying, hey assistant, use this database, right? And the database we're using is the vector we created just before we created the assistant. So we're kind of doing two in one. And then the temperature is going to be the assistant temperature. Okay, so now it'll update with all that stuff. And you can change the model. By the way, if you want to change the model you're using, you can do that. I'm just using 4.0. So we've created that. Now let's continue. And this is going to be basically another column. Add a column to the right. It's going to be API/body. And this is going to be the body that we're going to send in an API call if we want to modify the assistant. So say we want to actually update the name or the temperature or the instructions. We need to create a body that we send in the API call. And that's going to be a JSON object. And this is going to be name, instructions in lowercase, and temperature. Okay, so this will be the assistant temperature. So we've got the instructions, which is mapped to the assistant name. Sorry, we've got the name, the instructions, which is mapped to the instructions, and the temperature, as you guessed it, is mapped to the temperature. So there's nothing currently here, but if I add test and like 0.2, which is probably what we're going to use, you can see it's updating that there. So that's good. Let's continue. What we need to do now is construct some of the endpoints that we can use as the actual endpoint. So where are we going to send the body we just created, right? And so we need to put API/endpoint. And this first one is going to be the endpoint for modifying the assistant. And we're going to create a template column. Okay, and we're going to paste that. And if at any point you can't follow along quick enough, just pause it. And the assistant, of course, is going to be the assistant ID. So let's continue. We need the endpoint to create, to delete the vector. So we duplicate this, and this is going to be the endpoint for deleting the vector, so the database. And we want to do this because, yes, you could just delete it from Glide and not worry about OpenAI. But I like to have everything in sync. If there's no assistants here, I don't want any assistants there. If there's no databases or files or whatever here, I want that clean. I don't want unnecessary buildup of useless files, basically. So we get the vector and we replace this with the ID of the vector. So we've got the endpoint that we're going to use to modify the assistant. We've got the endpoint we're going to use to delete the assistant. And what we want to do now is one more thing here in the API. It's going to be API/endpoint delete table. Now in this case, this is going to be, we'll paste this here, this file, right? This is actually going to be referring to this because we're going to be uploading several different types. One file is going to be the wine table, and then we're going to have other files that we can actually attach and send. So what we're going to do is just paste this here for now, and we're just going to put 1, 2, 3, because what we need to do is add a column to the right, and we're going to say table/file ID. Okay, and this is actually just going to be a text field, and this is what we're going to use. I'll just move this across. This is what we're going to use back in this endpoint. Okay, Because if we delete an assistant, we also want to delete the file that we uploaded that stores the data of the table. So a little bit confusing at the moment, but you'll understand as we actually create it on the front end as well. You'll understand how that works. So what we want to do now is just add a few more fields. And the first one we're going to do is table. And this is going to be something like synced. Basically, when did we sync this table? So we're just going to add a date and time, and we'll just make it long, and we click save. So we've got the ID of the file, which is really the table. We got when we synced this table with OpenAI. Then what we need to do is get a status. So I'm just going to have a look what I did here. Okay, and the status is just something that will display on the front end. So add a column to the right. This is just going to be a template, and I'm just going to say, when was the last time we synced this table with the assistant? Okay. If it doesn't exist, it means we haven't synced yet. You can see here we haven't synced yet, and we need to name this, my bad, table/status. So I'm going to say basically, when was the last time we synced this table? Because if it's giving us funny answers, it might be because we haven't updated the AI with new data that's appeared in the wines table. Then what we want to do is add an icon. So I'll just have a look what icon we got here. And that is the OpenAI logo. So we're going to add a column to the right. And this is going to be, you guessed it, my code, experimental code. And we're going to add icons, and this is going to be OpenAI logo. So we added this before into the messages, so you could see the little icon of who's responding, and this is just going to be an icon for the actual assistant. So we're going to go duo tone, and we can just do our standard 88888. And then EF. So I forgot to name it again. This is going to be icon/display. We save that. And then we've got one more column. And what we're going to do is look up all the files that are related to this assistant. So we're going to go relation, where the assistant ID matches the file's assistant ID. And we want to make sure we match multiple. Now, because this is blank at the moment, it's saying, hey, I found a match, but that's not the case. So that is it for the assistants table. We've got one more table to do, and that is the users table. So I will see you there. Alrighty, so we don't need to add a table in this case, but we can add a little emoji. So I'm just going to put this dude with red hair as the users. Totally optional, of course. So you should already have 4 columns, which is the name, email, photo, and role. Now what we're going to do is create assistants. And this is going to be, the first one is going to be the current. Okay, and this is going to be the ID of the current assistant that we want to talk to. So we're going to save that, and then what we're going to do is we're going to add a column to the right, and this is going to be assistants total. And all we're going to do here to help with some visibility stuff on the front end is we're just going to say get a roll up, right? And we're going to count how many assistants that currently exist. At the moment it says 1. But you'll see that if we go into the assistants, we don't actually need this empty row. And back here, it's going to say 0. So we've got 0 assistants, and we haven't set a current assistant. The next thing we want to do is set the threads, or threads, plural. And this is going to be the current ID of the thread. Now, if you remember, this was that one field that we had to create in the user table. So what we're going to do now is just quickly jump back to the messages, and where we're displaying the icon, in threads, we're going to jump back to threads, and this display is going to look up the thread's current thread, and we're going to find if it's the current thread ID. We actually want to display the current, and if it's not, we want to display the default. Alright, so if the current thread that we set in our user table is the thread ID of this thread, then obviously it's the one we're looking at right now. So we want to show that green icon, otherwise we show the gray icon. Now I just want to go back to the threads and check that that is correct. Yep, current and default. So now we jump back to the user table and we get cracking with the rest of it. So we've added the thread ID. This is going to be threads slash, I think we can actually add the total first. Okay. And we're just going to do the same thing. We're going to do a roll up, and we're going to count how many threads exist. Okay. It says 1 because it just adds that default row. But if we go back to the threads and we get rid of this, we'll see that it's set back to 0. So what we need to do is add some more. I'm just going to copy this. We need to add some more endpoints. So we're going to add a column to the right, and this is going to be threads. This is going to be API slash endpoint, and this is going to be assign assistant. Let me make sure we spell it correct. Assign assistant. Okay, it's just going to be a template. And if you remember in that initial overview that I gave, we send a message, but we need to actually assign an assistant to respond to that message. And this is how we do that. So what we're going to do is we're going to copy this thread, and the thread is going to be the current thread ID. Okay. So once we've done that, we need to create an endpoint for the messages. So we duplicate this, and this is going to be the endpoint that we call to get all the messages. So we paste this, and we can actually leave the thread ID as is because it's already kind of set up for us. Then what we need to do is, now that we have the endpoint for assigning the assistant, we need to create the body that we send to that endpoint. So this is going to be body assign assistant, and we're going to use a template, and all we need here is just the assistant ID, which we get from the assistant current ID. So we've got the endpoint, and this is what we're going to send to that endpoint. And yeah, I thought that was a mistake, but it's because this is empty. So that's all good. Then what we need to do is create some additional API fields. So we're going to say API slash response. So now we need to start storing the response that the API provides us. So this is going to be for the thread created, and we can duplicate this, and it's going to be a response for the message sent. So this is where when we send a message, we'll get a response, and this is going to be where we are notified that the message has been answered. So then we have to go back a little bit and start looking up some stuff. So now that we've got the current thread ID, we're going to look up threads slash latest. Now what this is going to do is we're going to match, let me just make sure that this is correct, the thread created to the API response. Okay, so we're going to match the response we get when we create a thread to the thread's API response. Okay, so when we create a thread, we're going to store that here, and we're going to match it to the response we get in the threads table. And we're going to do this so we know what's the latest thread we created. So we save that, and then we're going to look up that ID. So if we add a column to the right, we say threads slash latest ID. So we're looking up the thread ID. Okay, so again, it might be a little bit confusing now, but basically when we create a thread, the response we get is going to be here, and it's also going to be here. So then what we do is to figure out what's the latest thread we created, we match that to that, and it will appear here, and then we have the ID of the latest thread that we created. Because then what we'll do is once it's created, we'll get this value and we'll paste it here. So when we create a thread, it takes us straight to that thread. So again, we're kind of putting in all the plumbing, all the electrical wiring and stuff on the back end now. And I can only do this in this method because I actually built it out beforehand. If you were tinkering away, I can guarantee it would take a lot longer to actually figure out how to connect all of this. But this is an advanced tutorial. So yeah, what can I say? I don't know what my point was. So let's just continue. We've got the latest ID. And then I believe there's just a few more things that we need to do. There's one more thing we need to do actually. And that's going to be the wines array. And this is going to be a joined list. There we go, computed, joined list of all of the JSON objects in the wine array. So that is all of the backend done. We have a few other things to do, which is create the layout, and in addition, create all the actions that are firing these API calls and stuff like that. So I will see you on the front end. Okay, so before we actually get into the actions and the layout, what you need to do is head to openai.com. And once you're logged into your account, you want to go to API keys, and you want to create a new secret key. So you're going to create a new secret key. You'll fill out this information, you'll create secret key, and then you'll copy the key that it presents you with. And make sure you hang on to this because you're going to need it for what we're about to do. So once you've done that, we'll head back to the table, and I can just close this off. And we're going to create the actions first, because since I know the actions that are required for this app to function, there's no point building the layout and then having to assign a placeholder action to each button and this and that. I want to create the actions first so that when we're building the layout, we can just assign the button or the on submit, etc. to actually perform the action that we've already created. So let's jump into the actions tab. And the first one we're going to set up from top to bottom is the create chat action. Now this is going to be a user interaction with the users table. And the first one we're going to do, first action we're going to perform is to set some column values in the user profile row. The actions that we're going to set is just to clear the threads / current ID. And if you see the number, that's just the order in which I added these columns to the tables. So you can ignore the numbers, but just focus on the name of the column. So this is going to be threads / current ID. We're going to clear it. And then we're also going to clear API / response thread created. So we're going to clear out any previous current threads that we've kind of set. And then we're going to create a new thread. So the endpoint for this is /v1/threads. It's going to be a post request. We're not going to have any query strings. We're just going to add some headers. And for almost every API call here, it's going to be the same. You're going to set the content type as application JSON. You're going to set the authorization as bearer space and then your API key. And then you're going to set OpenAI-beta as assistance equals version 2. Okay, so this will be the standard header setup for almost all of the API calls we're going to create. And in this case, we don't actually need to set a body. There's nothing we need to specify in the body of this API call, but we do need to save the response in the user profile API response thread created. So that's going to put the response from this API call into this field. Once we've done that, we're going to add a new thread to our threads table. So we're going to add row to the threads table, and we're going to set the assistant ID as the current assistant. So when we're building layout, we'll be able to select between our assistants. Whatever is selected at the time of creating this thread will be used as the assistant. So we're going to set that as assistant's current ID. And then we're going to put in a date time. So here for the thread /created, we're going to set the current date time. And then in the API/response, we are going to set this as user profile API response thread created. Once you've done that, we're just going to make sure that once that thread created response arrives and we've extracted the ID, we want to make sure that that's present before we set that as our current thread. Because it might set the old one or it might set blank. So we just want to make sure. Excuse me. So here, what we're going to do is wait for condition. And this is just an interaction, wait for condition. And we're going to wait 3 seconds. It'll probably be instant. You won't even see it. But we're going to wait 3 seconds and we're going to say opening thread, which basically means we're waiting so we can set this new thread we created as the current thread we're looking at. And the condition is that the thread's latest ID, and this should actually be user profile threads latest ID, is not empty. So we're going to wait till that's not empty, and then we're going to basically proceed with the last few actions. So we're going to set some additional column values, and we're going to be editing the user profile row, and we're just going to set the current thread ID as the thread's latest ID. So this will actually also be thread's latest ID. Okay. So in the user profile row, we're going to basically set this current ID as the latest ID. And then we're just going to show a notification. So we're going to say, hey, good job. The thread was created. That's the first action, creating a chat or creating a thread. The second that we're going to create is deleting a chat or deleting a thread. So this is going to be a user interaction with threads. Okay, so this is going to be with the threads table. And what we're going to do is we're going to use a delete method on a certain endpoint. So we're going to call API, this is the action, and the endpoint is going to be API endpoint delete thread. Now this is why it's so handy to get good naming conventions for your columns, because you can just see it here. This is the endpoint to delete the thread, so that's what we're going to set. The method is delete. We just need to set the same 3 headers, and we don't need a body and we don't need a response either. We can just send it off and it will delete. Then we want to, for the thread, the messages that were sent or that are part of this thread still exist in Glide. So we want to delete row for the messages related. So first we delete the messages, and that'll delete any associated messages. And we will then delete row for this item, which will delete the thread. Now, if you delete a thread in OpenAI, it deletes the chat too. So we don't have to do a second delete in terms of API calls. So that's just something to note. So we're going to delete messages, then delete the chat, and then we're just going to show a notification saying that the chat was deleted. The next action is when we are sending a message to a particular thread or a particular chat. So this is going to be a user interaction with messages. And this is because in the chat component, that's where we're going to be submitting them. So this is going to be a user interaction with messages. The first action is going to be a call API action. And we're going to basically set the endpoint as user profile API endpoint for messages. So once you've set that, once you've set that, you'll set the method as post. These three, again, will be the same as every other time. The body, however, is going to be the API body send message. So that's the body, and that is going to take our question, format it properly, so we can put it here as the body of this request. So that's going to be send message. Oops, I should stop doing that. And then the response body is going to be set in the user profile API response message has been sent. Okay, so when we send the message in the user profile row, we want to know that the message has been sent. The next action is going to be a post action. And this time we are going to assign through user profile API, we're going to assign the assistant to answer the message that we just sent. So we send a message and then we're going to say, hey, assistant, can you please answer this particular question? The method will be post. These are again exactly the same, but this time the body is going to be user profile API body assign assistant. Okay, and we don't need a response because what's going to happen is we're going to send this off, and then basically it's going to start trying to answer the question. It won't respond with an answer. It'll just answer it and update the thread. So then what we have to do is put a wait condition, and this is just interaction wait, and we're just going to wait maybe 5, maybe to be safe 6 or 7 seconds, however long you think it would take to answer. And you can test this out and play around, but you want to wait long enough that it has time to answer. And the reason we have to put this wait condition is because we don't have the ability to stream the response directly from OpenAI. We just have to wait until we think it's answered and then get all the messages, which is what we do in the next call API, which is once we think it's had time to answer, then we're going to basically run another call API. The endpoint this time is going to be the API endpoint for messages. So this is what we sent it to before, and now we're going to fetch all of the messages. And it's going to be a GET request. These are exactly the same, but we're going to paste or insert the response body into user profile API response message answered. Now this is actually, again, all of the messages, but the answer will be included in that basically list of JSON objects. So that is the actions for the chat. Let's move on to the assistant. My bad. There's still one more thing to do, which is adding a row to the messages. So we have to add row to the message table. The assistant ID is going to be the user profile, assistance, current ID. The thread / ID is going to be the user profile, threads, current thread ID. The message question, we're not going to set anything because this is actually the response. But what we will do is we'll set a timestamp as the current date time. And then we will set the answer that we saved in the messages answered from our user profile. We'll save that into the response. So we're going to go user profile, API, message, answered. And then from that message, if you remember, we get the latest one, we clean it up, and then we conditionally show it on the front end. Okay, so now the chat actions are done. Let's move on to the assistants. So the next action we're going to add is a create assistant action. And this is going to be a user interaction with assistants. And the first thing we're going to do is an API call. We're going to send an API call to OpenAI to create a vector or to create a database. So we're going to have the endpoint as vector_stores. There's no dynamic data here. This is just a static one. The method is post. These are the same, but the request body is going to be the API body for creating a vector. So you can see that, again, these naming conventions really help identify what's supposed to be what. So we're going to create a vector using this body for the request. And then the response that we get, we're going to store in API response for creating a vector. Once we've done that, we're just going to do a quick check to ensure that the vector ID is not empty and that there's actually a response that we received. So if that condition is not met, we're going to see creating vector until it is met, and then it will continue. And if it never satisfies that condition after 3 seconds, it's going to say vector not created. But the condition is basically we want to wait and ensure that the response is there. So the response for creating a vector is not empty, and the ID that we extract from that response is also not empty, because we need the database ID to create the assistant, because we have to specify which database we want them to actually deal with. So once we've set that, this is vector ID, and we want to make sure it's not empty. Then we want to continue with the create assistant API call. And this is going to be another static value, http:// assistance. And again, the same 3 pieces of information are going to be pasted here. But this time, the request body is going to be the body for creating an assistant. And then the response is going to be API response for creating an assistant. And again, what we're going to do, just like we did with the vector, is just ensure that the response for creating an assistant is not empty and the assistant ID is extracted, so it's not empty. And once we know that that's all good, then in the user profile row, we're going to set some column values, and we're going to set the current assistant as the assistant ID. So when we create an assistant, it will immediately set that as the current assistant. So we're not still looking at an old assistant, or we're not running into issues when we're trying to create a chat and so on and so forth. And then of course we just show a notification saying that the assistant was created. The next action is probably the most complex because it involves many different steps, but this is deleting an assistant. Again, I want it to be completely synced with OpenAI. You don't have to do this, but it's the most proper way of building this app. So this is going to be another user interaction with assistants. And what we're going to do for this first one, we're going to set a condition, and we want to make sure that the files related is empty and that the table file ID is set. So it means there's no files, but there's still a file ID for the table that we're syncing with this assistant. So these are the conditions that need to be met in order for it to do these things. This is first going to delete the synced table from OpenAI. So this is going to be API endpoint for deleting the table. The method is going to be delete. And in this case, we only need authorization bearer. We don't need the other information. We don't need a body and we don't need the response. Then what we will do is delete the vector. So we're going to call the API, and this endpoint is going to be API delete vector. The method again is going to be delete, but this time it's a little bit more vital information. So we have to actually specify some other things. So we're going to specify the content type, the authorization, and this, but we don't need the response to be returned. Then we're going to delete the assistant. So we've deleted the synced table, we've deleted the database, and then we're going to delete the assistant from OpenAI. So this is actually going to be the endpoint for modifying the assistant. In this case, we're deleting it, but it's the same sort of thing. We're modifying it to be nothing. And we set that as the endpoint. The method is delete, and we have these three things. Then we can delete this item from glide. We're going to close the overlay, and then we're going to say the assistant has been deleted. Now these delete vector are exactly the same, and this is exactly the same, and everything else is exactly the same. The only difference is that if we created an assistant and we never synced a table, which means we never created a JSON file and sent it to OpenAI, this is not going to work. It's going to fail because it's trying to delete a file that doesn't exist. So all we do here is if we say files is empty, we want to make sure it's empty, but the file ID is empty. You remember here, we had it not empty. If the file ID for the table is empty, then we do this. Otherwise, we need to tell them to delete the files first, and then they can delete the assistant. Okay, so it's just some checks there to make sure that everything's running really well. Here, this is going to be the function to delete a file. So if this appears, then this is the action that they want to do. And this is going to be a user interaction with files. And we're going to make sure that the file ID, right, is not empty. If it's not empty, we're going to call the API, and we're going to set the endpoint as the API endpoint for deleting the file. Then what we want to do is set the method as delete. And in this case, we just need the authorization as our bearer-key. Don't need to set anything else. Then we can delete it locally, and then we can let them know that the file was deleted. If the file ID is not is empty, means it hasn't actually been uploaded, which means this probably was an invalid file type, then we can just delete it from the local glide database, and we can show a notification that it was deleted. The next one is the modify assistant table. And this is going to be a user interaction, sorry, the modify assistant action. And this is going to be user interaction with assistants. And what we're going to do is call the API. The endpoint is going to be API the endpoint for modifying an assistant. So we used this before to delete it. In this case, we're actually going to modify it. It's going to be a post. These three are the same, but the body of the request is going to be API, the body for modifying the assistant. So you can see that the calls, we're just setting the endpoint that matches this overall action and the body that matches this overall action. And it's very clear, in my opinion, in terms of the naming conventions. So we don't need a response. Basically, all we need to do is say that the assistant has been edited. Now, you could get a response to make sure it's all, okay, but in this case, it's a fairly simple call, and we can just say, yep, it's all good to go. So now that that's done, the next two are going to use webhooks, and they're going to use webhooks because they're sending information to make, and then make is processing a lot of that stuff for us. So what we're going to do here in this assistant sync table is we're going to have a user interaction with assistants, and we're going to make sure that the table file ID is not empty, because this is the ID of the file that we're going to delete if it exists, right? So if we've synced already and a file has been created in OpenAI, we want to delete that before we upload the new one. So, because again, otherwise it will keep building up and they'll have 10 versions of the same table, but all differing information. So if it's not empty, which means there's a value present, we're going to delete the old file. So we're going to call the API, and the endpoint is going to be API, the endpoint for deleting the table, and the method is going to be delete, and we're just going to set the authorization here as the header. Then what we're going to do is trigger a webhook, and I'll set up the webhook in the next part of this video. But for now, all you need to know is that you'll create a webhook in Make, and then you'll be given a URL. You paste that URL here, and then you set the following variables. So we're going to set the row ID as the row ID of the assistant. The data is going to be user profile __array. The vector is going to be the vector ID, and the type is going to be table in inverted commas. So basically what we're saying here is that get this array of wines, add it as a file to this database, and perform a certain action in Make because it's a table, not a PDF or something like that. So again, we'll set that up later, but you can still set it up all now without putting this, because we're going to generate that later. And then you can just say table sync. Okay, good to go. We've deleted the old one, we've uploaded the new one, and we're now synced. If the file ID is empty, it's probably the first time you're syncing the table, so there's nothing to delete in OpenAI, so we're just going to perform the exact same action. These are exactly the same, so you can just duplicate this and drag it here, and then we're going to say table synced. Okay. The last one is similar to this, but instead of uploading a file, which is the table, we're going to upload a file, which is the file that we're uploaded, that we want to add to the database. And that is going to be an interaction with files, because I think it's an on submit that we perform this action. So what we're going to do is, this is going to be a user interaction with files, and we're going to make sure that the vector ID is not empty. So we're going to make sure that the vector ID is not empty. Then we are going to upload a file. Oh, sorry. Now we want to just make sure, and this is that validation, So as long as the vector ID is not empty, we can continue. And then we're going to validate the file type. So we're going to wait for 1 second, and it's going to say checking file type. And then the failure message will say invalid. And we want to make sure that the type of file that we've uploaded is not an invalid file type. And that's done with that little JavaScript snippet. So as long as it's good, we can continue. If it's an invalid file, basically we just have to delete the file, upload a new one that is actually valid. So what we do here is very similar, in fact, exactly the same as the previous webhook, but the only difference is the data and the file type. So what we're going to do is we're going to upload a file. This is trigger webhook. And if I didn't show it before, this is trigger webhook. So for this one here, we're going to trigger a webhook, and you can put a placeholder here for now. The request body is going to be row ID, which will be the row ID of the file. The data is going to be the file link. The vector is going to be the vector ID. This is why we made sure it's not empty. And then the type is actually going to be taken from our validation JavaScript. So it's going to say .pdf or .json or whatever it is. And we're going to set that as the type. So for the other one, it's always going to be table. For this, it might be PDF, it might be JSON, etc. So then what we're going to do, once we trigger this, we're going to wait about 5 seconds to make sure that we get a response that the file ID has uploaded. So we're going to wait for condition. We're going to wait 5 seconds, and you can increase this if it fails or if it doesn't work properly. And we're going to say uploading, and the condition we're going to wait for is that the file ID has been returned from OpenAI. So if it is returned, good. It means that the file we uploaded has just been uploaded to OpenAI, and it's back in our, the ID of that file is back in our row. So we're going to wait until the file ID is not empty. And then we're going to say, awesome, the file has been uploaded. So that was a lot to take in. Now what we're going to do is head over to make and set up the webhook that will receive the webhook actions from this app. So I'll see you in make. Just kidding. We need to set up the layout first because we actually need to create some assistants and some vectors before we can create the make automation. And there's only one make automation, but it's important because we need to do several things that we cannot do from Glide, as far as I know. If someone has a better method, I am all ears. But what we need to do is jump into the layout and begin building it. So the layout, I love the simplicity of this. It is one page and one container. That is it for the entire app. That is all you need. There are some slide outs, but besides that, it's extremely simple. So people won't get lost or not understand how to actually set this up. So what I'm going to do is first, I'm actually going to clear out, there are some dummy information. I'm just going to clear this out. Okay, so there's no message and we can leave that. Okay, so on the layout screen, we're going to add, you'll add a screen first and you can call it AI Assistance. The source will be the user's page. It'll be a custom screen, and on that screen, we're going to add a container. So this container is going to be a 1:2 ratio card that's aligned to the top. And we don't need to set any options for this. So basically we're setting up a container that is split 1:2. At the top of the left-hand column, we're going to add a hint. And this hint is going to have a description of no assistance created yet. So this is just the hint component. And we're going to say, okay, no assistants have been created yet. The mood will be neutral. It's not an alert, it's just a general notification. And so obviously to display this, we need to make sure that this only shows when the user profile assistance, total assistance is 0. Because if it's not 0, then some assistance exists. So we're going to set that up. And then the action we're going to perform when we click this button is going to be titled Create Assistant. And we're simply going to show a new item, or show a new screen for this item as a slide in. Okay, so we're going to show a new slide in. So you should be able to see this button because no assistants are created. And so we need to click this in order to actually configure the screen. So we click Create Assistant. And what we're going to do is clear out some of the existing stuff here. It'll usually put some default stuff. It's probably your face or your photo and blah, blah, blah. But what we want to do is, first of all, we want to change the title to assistance. So this is this top bit. And then what we want to do is add a button. Okay, I know this is at the top, but first thing we're going to do is add a button that says Add Assistant. So it's going to be a basic button that's wide, and we don't need to change any options, but what we do need to do is set the action for this to show a form screen. So this is going to show a form screen. The target is going to be current because we want to stay in this little slide out. And then what we can do is, as you guessed it, click this button to now set up the form to add an assistant. So we're only going to have 3 inputs here. We're going to be submitting to the destination table is going to be assistants. We don't need any options. We can just, actually we need to add assistant. That's the title of the form. And then what we're going to do is assign on submit, we're going to select the create assistant action that we created earlier. And this is why I did the actions first, because it's much easier to just set it here. So we're going to assign this as create assistant on submit. And then we just need 3 text entry components, and they all have to be required. This is the name, the instructions, and the temperature. So these are all required fields. And in fact, what we can do now is actually create an assistant. So we can call this assistant 1, and I'm going to paste some old objectives. Okay, and you can see this in Loqode School, or I'll make it available somewhere else. And the temperature by default is set to 0.2. So when I click on submit, it's actually going to run that create assistant action that we created earlier. So I click submit, and you can see it's creating a vector and the assistant has been created. So what I want to do is actually just show you in OpenAI, and I had no assistants before, but now we've got assistant 1 that has been created. It's attached to assistant 1 vector. That's the database. There's no files in it yet, but it's attached, and the temperature is 0.2, and we have the objectives here. So you can see that that's all created by one click of that button. So now what we want to do is we want to actually set up this. You won't see anything like this. It'll just say created. So what you need to do is add a custom collection. And this custom collection is going to show assistance. It's going to show it as a full layout, and we're going to set the background as a card. And we don't need to set any search bar or options, but we want to make sure that on item click, nothing happens. Okay. So those are the settings for the assistant, and we don't want a title because we have the title up here. We already know it's assistance. So we created the assistant. Then we're going to add a title component to this assistant. So custom collection is here, title component is here, and we're just going to set up some data. So this is going to be a simple style. The title is going to be the assistant name. The subtitle is going to be the status. And you can see we haven't synced it yet, and we can't click this because we haven't set up the webhook. But this would show when we last synced the table. Obviously you don't have these buttons yet, but that's what will happen. So we're going to set the size as compact. We're going to set the image fill as fill. And then we're going to set two non-actions or none actions because we don't really want to highlight the edit or delete. We just want to have it available, but not in your face. So the third action we're going to set is the edit screen, and we're going to show the edit screen for this item in the current view. So once you've added that, we can actually set that up. So you click these three buttons and you'll click edit, and the edit form name, the title, should be the name of the assistant. And then we're just going to add the same fields we used to create the assistant. So we're going to say name, instructions, and temperature. And just on a note, you want to make sure the temperature is between 0 and 2. Any other value will come up with an error. In fact, 0 might not even be a valid temperature, but who knows? So once you've done that, you've set those three required fields. We want to go back to the form, and in general, on submit, we want to modify the assistant. Okay, so I'm going to change this from 1 to number 1, and we click submit, and it's going to say assistant has been edited. And if we come back to OpenAI and we refresh this page, we'll see that the assistant has been edited. So now that we've done that, we want to add another button. So let's go back to the title component. We want to add another button that is a delete title, and the action it's going to perform is to delete the assistant. Now we don't want to do that now because we want to continue setting this up, but you're just going to set it as delete assistant. So that is actually all we need for the title component. Then we're going to add a button block, and this button block is going to have two buttons. You can set it as basic or tiles, it really doesn't matter. But the two actions, the first one is going to be sync table. We're going to show a little sync sign, and we're just going to set this as the sync table action. And the second is going to be showing a form screen in the current view, and we're going to title this as upload a file. Okay, so when we click upload file, it's going to open the form. The form is going to be sending, or the destination will be the files table, and on submit we're going to run that upload file action. Okay, and we just want to title this as add a file, and then we're going to have 4 fields that we need to set for this form. We're going to have a text entry field that is writing to the file name. We're going to have a file picker, and we can keep these checked. These are both required, and this is going to be writing to the link. And then what we're going to do is we're going to set some columns as values. So we're going to set the vector ID. So that is the vector ID. And then we're going to be setting that to vector ID. And the assistant ID, which is here, we're going to be setting that as the assistant ID for the file. Okay, so once that's done, we don't want to click submit because, again, we haven't set up the webhook for this, but we will shortly. So once that's done, you can click back and these two buttons are now set up. Then we want to add, we can add a hint first, okay? And this hint can say no files are added yet. The mood's going to be neutral. And we're going to show this when the related files for this assistant is empty. Okay, so if it's empty, we're going to show that. And we don't need to actually set anything else. Then above this hint, we'll add a collection. This is going to show us a list of all the files that this assistant has basically got access to that we've uploaded. So this is the source of this collection, which is just a card collection, a list, compact list, is going to be the related files. So we're going to say source, files related. We're going to have it as a list. The title is going to be the file name. The description is going to be the file status. And this is that thing that's going to say uploading file or the date at which it was uploaded. The image, the meta we don't need to touch, and the image is going to be icon display. So it's either going to be a gray file uploaded to the cloud, or it's going to be a red file with an X. And then what we need to do is set it as compact, card, square, and bold. Then we're going to remove the search bar and that sort of stuff. We don't really need that. We don't want a title either. But in the actions, we can conditionally, optionally show a detail screen for this item. It's not necessary. I don't even know if I configured it here. But what we do want to do is, for the collection item actions, we're going to leave this none, and then we're going to set this delete as the assistant delete file. So this is that action that we created here to delete the file. And that is actually all we need to do for this current setup. So what we can do is close this, because this is still that original create assistant new screen. Okay, so what we can do now is actually copy this component, come back, and underneath that hint that should be hidden now, we're going to add a button block, and it's going to be basic wide none show. This create chat is going to be titled as create chat. We can select a little emoji, or not emoji, an icon, and this action is going to be create chat. We're going to only allow this action when the assistant's current ID, right? Assistants. In fact, this should be assistant's current ID is not empty. So user profile assistant's current ID is not empty. We don't want to actually trigger this yet, because what we want to do is show a new screen for this item as a slide in, exactly the same as the hint. And this is going to be called assistants, not create assistant. It's going to be assistants, like manage assistants. And we can set a little robo dude. We're going to show a new screen for this item as a slide in. And then we're going to paste the exact same thing as the original hint new screen. So we're going to paste this custom collection, and then you can set this as, you can copy the button as well. You'll have to change the visibility, but you can copy the button and set that here to perform the exact same thing. Okay, so once you've done that, you should have all the same functionality, because we've just copied and pasted it, and the functionality is housed within the custom component, not this new screen. Same as the add assistant. This is just a form that is adding an assistant to the assistants table. So we can go back and we can close this now, and these two buttons are set up. We only want to show this, however, when the total assistance does not equal 0. So this is user profile assistance total does not equal 0. Next thing we want to do is just add a very simple choice component. And this choice component is going to write to user profile assistance current ID. The source is going to be the assistance table. The values is going to be assistant ID. The images is going to be icon display. And we're going to display as assistant name. The label is going to be select assistant. And we want to make sure that an assistant is always selected, because if it's not, and we try and create a chat, it's going to go haywire. So we're going to set that up. And this is, we don't actually need to set any of this at the moment, right? This is just a choice component. And it won't show if there's no assistance. That's why there's no visibility. So once we've set up that choice component, we can add a hint. This hint is going to say no chats created. In the options, we're going to show this when the user profile threads total equals 0, or this should actually be user profile assistance total, and assistance total doesn't equal 0. So if we have created an assistant, but there's no threads, then we're going to show this. Yeah, just have to check. And then there's no actions we need to set for this, okay? So we're just conditionally showing this if there's no chats that have been created. And then for the collection, we're going to add a list. And this list is going to be, the source is going to be threads. It's going to be a list. The title is going to be threads created. So it's just going to be a date of when we created the chat. We don't need to name the chat. You could use AI to name it post factum, but that's fine. And the image is going to be the icon display. So this will tell us if we've selected that current chat, that current thread. The size is going to be compact. The style is going to be card. We're going to make it square and we're going to make it bold. And that's it for this section. What we want to do is in the options, we want to set the assistant ID, the filter. We want to make sure the assistant ID is the user profile's assistant current ID. Okay, so we're going to filter the threads to only show threads for the current assistant we've selected. Oops. And we're going to sort the data by the created date, so thread created, descending. Then what we need to do is assign some actions to occur when we want an action to occur. So what we're going to do here is on item click, we're going to set some column values in the user profile row, and the values we're going to set is the threads current. We're going to set that as the thread ID. Okay, we're going to set the thread ID of the current thread as the current thread that we're looking at in our user profile. And then for the collection item actions, we're going to call it delete, and we're going to assign here the action for threads, delete chat. And this is that action that basically deletes the chat and deletes the messages. And for the left-hand side of the column, we're done. We've got one more component to set up, and that is the comments. So the comments section is going to be a chat component. So we're going to add a chat component. It's going to be general. In the general, we're going to select the source as messages. The title is going to be chat. The saved text is going to be the message question. We're going to select the style as chat, and then we're going to set some display data. And you can see here that it's very easy for us to set the display message as the text. The timestamp should actually be the message timestamp, or I'm not sure actually. I think that's correct. We can check after. The display is going to be the display photo. Sorry, the photo is going to be the display photo. The author name is going to be the display name, and the author email is going to be the display email. So this will either be the assistant information or our information. Then for the save data, we are going to save to the assistant ID. We're going to save the current assistant's ID from our user profile row. For the thread ID, we're going to save the current thread ID from our user profile row. The message timestamp is going to be the current date and time. And the author ID is going to be our user profile row ID. So once we've set that up, what you need to do is we're just going to go into the options, make sure that this is set first. So we're going to filter some data, and we want to make sure that the thread ID is the user profile current thread ID. So this is only going to pull in messages that have this thread ID, the one we're currently looking at. And the assistant ID for the message matches the user profile assistant ID. So that's the condition that we want to set. And we can leave it as table order, that's okay, or we can sort it later on if we need. But for the actions, we just need to make sure that allow comments is set. And then the last thing we need to do is set this as chat. So actions for messages, send message. So we have actually set up the entire application besides the webhooks. So what I want to do is show you how this works. Now we can actually chat to this assistant because we don't need a file yet. So I can create a chat. It's going to create a chat and select it here. And we can theoretically ask it a question, but it actually doesn't have any files to use as its source of truth yet. Okay, so, but you can see that this very nicely created it. And we can delete and we can do whatever we want. So what we need to do now is head to make, set up the one scenario, and then the entire thing is done. We get the webhook URL, we paste it here, and we can test it out. Okay, so we're going to head over to make, and if you don't have an account, you can set one up. It's make.com. Once you've set up the account, we're going to create a new scenario, and we're going to basically, in the AI assistance, we're going to call it AI assistance file handler, or whatever you want to call it, webhook, it doesn't matter. But the first thing we're going to do is add a webhook module. So in add, you can search for webhooks, and when you click it, you can click custom webhook. Okay, so I'll zoom out a bit so I can basically create it alongside the actual one. So what we're going to do here is, for this webhook, you're going to choose a hook, or you're going to create one. You're going to create one because you haven't created it yet. So we're going to click add, and we're going to call it whatever we want. Basically, you know, file handler for AI assistance, blah, blah, blah. And then once you've created it, what you're going to do is essentially click save, and then it's going to basically ask you to send it some structure. So it's going to be like waiting to determine the structure. So what you can do is head back to your AI Assistance app, and in the actions, in fact, on the layout, because we created one, we can go Assistance, and we can click this Sync Table button, because we know that when we click that, it's going to fire this action. And this action, basically, if there's an old file, it'll delete it, but it's going to trigger the webhook. Okay, and it's going to send this information, and this information is what's going to be used to determine the data structure. So you're going to copy the link, right? You copy this link, you paste it here, you close it, and then you click Sync Wine Table or a Sync Table. Okay. Once you click that and you jump back into Make, you'll see that it's determined the structure, and you'll be able to view the structure. So if I can go back, I can discard the changes, and I can have a look at the history, and I'll show you what it looks like. So we'll go here, and you can see that this is what it will look like. That information that we set, here it will say table for you, but it's still, all that matters is the data structure. So it's going to be row ID, data, vector, and type. Okay. Once you've set that up, and I'll go back to the diagram. If it loads, okay. So once you've determined the data structure, you can continue building. So we're going to add a router, and it's going to have 2 routes. Okay, we don't need to set these up yet. You'll see something gray. So you'll see something, if I add a flow control router, okay, you will see basically if you connect it, I'll just connect it to the end here. What you want to do is click the plus button, and you'll see these 2 things. Okay, so I'm just going to unlink, I'm going to unlink that. So you'll see these 2 gray things. We don't need to touch these now. What we need to do is set up some filters. So what we're going to do is, for this one, we're going to call this files, and we're going to say if, and we need access. So I'll show you over here. We're going to say if the type, okay, if the type is not equal to table, then it's going to be a file, because we need to do different operations. So if the type is not a table, it's going to be a file, and it will go along the top track. And for here, if the type, so we're going to call this table, if the type is equal to table, then we're going to go along the bottom track. And we need to perform different actions. Okay? So the first thing we're going to do is, if it's a file, actually we'll do the table first, since we've synced the table. What we're going to do is add a JSON module, and it's going to be transform to JSON. And what we're going to transform is the data that we received from the webhook. But we're just going to add this little square bracket on either side, so it's an array. Because if you remember, it was just a comma separated list. Excuse me. So we're going to create a JSON object, transform it as JSON. And then I'll just delete this stuff so we have a nice clean canvas. Then once we've transformed it into JSON, we're going to add OpenAI upload a file. And once we've clicked that, you'll see something like this. So if you haven't already, you need to create the connection. But what we're going to do is we're going to basically create a new JSON file. And here I'm just using now, which is the current time. So this current date and time dot JSON. So this is the name of the file, and the file data, we can just set it as this JSON string. And you have to make sure that the purpose is assistance. So once you've set that up, and it's uploading the file, then we need to add that file, because databases and files are separate. We need to add that file to the vector. So what we're going to do is, once it's uploaded, we're going to add another OpenAI module, and this is going to be create a vector store file batch. So we're going to create a vector store file batch, and we're going to set it as your OpenAI connection. Okay, and you'll have to set this up. But the batch mode is going to be choose vector store, and we're going to map it. We're going to map it because then we can specify which vector from the webhook we want to add it to, and the file ID is the file we just uploaded. So it's going to take this file, add it to the vector, and we know that that vector is accessible from our assistant. And then what we want to do is use the glide module, and basically we're going to you need to also set this up, and it's pretty straightforward. I'm not going to go into it now, but you can set this up in Glide. It's the make integration. Once you've set that up, we want to add it to a certain app. So you pick the app you're creating now. We're going to add it to assistants. So the table we're going to be, this is edit row. Okay. So the row we're going to be editing is in the app you're currently creating. It's in the assistants table. We identify the row by setting this as the row ID we received from the webhook. Oops. So the row is going to be the row ID we received from the webhook, and we're going to update it with the file ID that was created by the OpenAI integration. And the reason we're setting it in the assistant table, not in the file table, is because this is that table sync. It's that special JSON file that takes all of the information from the table we've specified, adds it, turns it into a file, adds it to OpenAI, and then we're going to return it to our assistant, and that is the table that they're going to sync with. And then we're going to set the table synced as now. So we're going to say it was synced right now. And that's all you need to do for this bottom section. And for the top section, we need to set up, well, we've already set the filter. This needs to be a HTTP request. Now, the reason we need to do this is because OpenAI can't upload a file if all it has is the link to that file. It needs the actual file data, right? Think of it as it needs the content of that file, not the link to the file. So we're going to add a HTTP module, and this is going to be get a file. And basically it downloads a file from a given URL. Okay, so if we upload a PDF, it's going to get that PDF and download it, and then it's going to be accessible. So what we're going to download is the data, because in this case, if it's a file, it will be a link. It won't be the JSON, it will be a link. And so we're going to download from that link, and this will create a file. Then we can do exactly the same as down here, but in this case we can just select HTTP get a file. So it's going to get that file, and we don't have to set anything else. We can just assign it the purpose as assistance. Then, just like below, we're going to add it to a vector. Which vector? Well, we know because we got that in the webhook. Okay, so we're going to choose vector store. It's going to be map. This is also going to be create a vector store file batch. So we're going to select the vector ID. We're going to select the file ID from this. And the last thing is, instead of updating the assistance row, we're going to update the AI assistance. Well, this is the current app. it says different because I changed the name after the fact. But we select the app, we select the files table, and then we specify the row ID, and we have that because it came in the webhook. The file ID is going to be this, and we're going to say the file was created now. And that is actually all we need to do. So let's give that a test. Let's head back here. And what we can do now is click sync wine table. So when I click this, it's going to fire this action where it deletes any old files and triggers that webhook. So I click sync the file table, and there we go. The table has been synced. And if we have a look here, we can see that it was last synced now. So we know that this assistant has access to that file. So if I come back, I'm currently on that assistant. I've created a new chat already. What are the aromas of my red wine? When we submit, don't forget, in the chat, it's going to fire this off. So we click submit, and then it's going to say here, we're going to see that thinking, and this is that arbitrary 5, 6, 7 seconds. Then it's going to get all the responses, and it's going to tell us that the aromas of our red wine are those. And we know that that's the case because it says it here. And so what I want to do is show you now in OpenAI the fact that if we have a look at this assistant and we have a look at the assistant's database, that JSON file that contains all the information about our table is now uploaded, which is amazing. But that's not all. This went on the bottom track, right? Now we're going to send one on the top. So let's go back and let's upgrade or update this assistant with some files. So I'm going to upload a file, and this is going to be a temperature guide, not goodie, guide. And I'll just choose a random, I think it's on my desktop. No, I deleted it. Temperature. I think I deleted it. You know what I'll do? Get it out of the trash. Where is it? Or maybe I didn't delete it. Oh, it was there. I just saw it. Wine temperature guide. Let's bring that back. Where's my desktop? Here. So now that it's out of the bin, we go to desktop and we can select it. And this is just a random PDF. And don't forget, when we submit, it's going to check that it's a valid file type. If it's good, it's going to send it off to Make, which will send it to OpenAI, which will tell us that it's updated. So we click submit. It's uploading to the assistant, and if it's all good, we'll see a date that this was synced, and it's not because we got an error. So let's have a look what that error was. Actions, history. Oh, okay. I don't think I waited long enough, but you can see it was uploaded. So that's just a matter of giving it a bit more time. So we can just say 10 seconds. Maybe I didn't give it enough. But you can see that it's uploaded. And actually, if we go to OpenAI and we open this database, there is my PDF. So it now has access to that. So we can ask it a question. Now that it's got this information, we can ask it, how long should I wait until the wine is 16 degrees Celsius? And I think it has to be capital again. So we send it a message. And this is a question that is referring to that PDF that we just uploaded. So it's going to think. And it's saying we should wait 30 minutes until it's 16 degrees, 16 degrees, 30 minutes. So that's pretty awesome. And what we want to do is just check that the assistant actually rejects bad files. So let's say bad file. And we're going to select, let's just select a random image, PNG. And we click submit. And it's an invalid file type. So it's not going to trigger, it's going to stop. So what we can do is delete it. Did we set that? This should be delete file. If the file ID is empty, we'll delete this row. That should actually delete. Oh, that's strange. That's a bug. It was working before. But you can test it for yourself. We'll just check that the file ID is indeed empty. It is empty. So I'm not sure why that wouldn't be deleting. Ah, there we go. See, I told you it's a bug. So that's it. It's really, really awesome. You can add a new assistant, right? I can call this assistant 2. I can add some instructions. Very concise. We submit. This will create an assistant in OpenAI. We can view that by refreshing this page here. The assistant's there. It's created a database for it. We can add files to it. And it's pretty incredible. So thank you for following along. That was a long one. And you can see it's set it here. And if we jump back to this assistant, we can do this. And we can create a new chat. And it will select the new chat. And we can ask it questions. And it's very, very cool. And my voice is just about gone, but I got there in the end. So thank you all for watching. I hope that was interesting for you. I know it was very complex, very information heavy, but that's just the nature of the sort of app that we're building. So I hope to see you in low code school. Thanks.